My name is Viktor Gilinsky. What do I remember about my childhood? I remember a lot about my childhood, of course, yeah. Well, you know, my father was a prominent educator, member of the Warsaw City Council. And I mean, I actually have some pictures of me walking on the street with him, you know, very proudly. Actually, one of the prouder things was in May 1st, 1939, you know, they always had a big May Day parade, the socialists, you know, and these were the Jewish Socialist Bund. And so I walked with my father. I was 5 years old, and I walked, you know, with my father, and that was, you know, in short pants, white shirt, red scarf, like the uniform of the youth of the socialist Jewish socialist group, the Bund, and so that was a very proud moment. Yeah. Well, they you know, they were the leading Jewish party. There were elections in 1938, and they swept the elections. And they represented, you know, support for working class, in particular Jewish working class. But they were allied with the Polish socialists, so their language was Yiddish. You know, Poland at that time was a combination of many ethnicities. I mean, the Poles themselves were about 65% of the country, maybe, and there were others. There were Ukrainians, Belarusians, Germans, Jews. Jews may actually have been the largest minority, and so this was a Jewish grouping. Each of these nationalities had their own school systems and their own languages. So it was not unusual, you know, for there to be a separate one for Jews. Yiddish-speaking Jews, I should say. Yeah. Well, you know, the war started September 1st, and initially the Germans were not so much going after Jews as any kind of prominent people who might be a source of resistance, and especially labor leaders. And so the Bund kind of overlapped these two categories, both labor and Jewish. And the Germans were shooting Union people, and you know, at the front, and Poles active in labor. And so the Bund leadership decided they had better get out of Warsaw. So they left Warsaw in the first week of the war and headed east. Poland at that time still thought they might be able to hang on to some part of the country, which turned out to be not the case when the Soviets moved in 2 or 3 weeks later. But here's the interesting thing, I think, for most of these people left their wives and children in place, because at that time, no one imagined that armies would harm women and children, which of course was not the case. So my father left, as I said, around June 6, June 7, with the leadership of the Bund, but we stayed in place. And eventually, Warsaw held out for quite some time, but at the end of September, Warsaw surrendered. And so the German army marched in. And, you know, so we were under the Germans for a short time, until my father, who was then in the Soviet zone, sent a smuggler, the kind of people who, you know, thrive in wartime and cross borders, that kind of thing, to take us out. And so on one night in, must have been late October or early November, we left at night in a truck with a bunch of other people. And by the way, in my closet, I have the pajamas that I wore on that night, because my mother saved them. Oh, I show them to you. They're all yellow now. But so I was carried out, and we went by truck to a certain point, and then we switched to wagons, like, you know, you've seen in the movies, these long refugee trains, you know, going one way, trying to leave. And we went into the Soviet zone where my father was. Now, actually, at that time, going from one zone to the other was not a problem, because people forget the Soviets were then essentially allied with the Nazis. So it was not that difficult to cross the border. The State Department was not very helpful, and they delayed it. And by the time we got the visas, the Soviets had taken over Lithuania. So we were just stuck there and didn't know what to do. And we were hiding in a farm that took in, you know, guests, you might say. So just in the country. And that's where we were until the opportunity to get a Sugihara visa, you know, came around. I don't know. I mean, I've just read about it, actually. I think one of the features of all that was that I don't, at least in the case of my parents, I never heard anyone talk about it. And nor did I ever hear any of the other people who came with us on the same path talk about it. I don't think they appreciated what was done. But anyway, the answer is I don't know. Well, you know, first we went to from Lithuania to Minsk, which is in Belarusia. You know, Minsk. I don't know whether Minsk was then in Poland or not. But in any case, I remember we had to sleep on the station floor for 3 days or so. And the funny thing about these sorts of things is that kids are not bothered by it. You know, it wasn't like now you think as an adult, if you had to go sleep on the floor in the train station, you think it was horrible. But I don't personally remember it being, you know, my parents must have been frightened to death all the time. But somehow they protected me, and I just didn't feel it was just sort of an adventure. But then we went to Moscow to pick up the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And there's a great tragedy involved there, because my mother's sister, my aunt, lived there. Her husband had been a Polish communist, and he was in the prison camps, you know, in the north. And so she was treated as the wife of an enemy of the people. And she and my father wanted to meet. And but that was very dangerous, because he was, you know, prominent anti-communist. She was watched, and so on. So first we went with my mother and I went. And my mother wanted to give her a present, a sweater. And just to give you an idea of what the feeling was in those days, you couldn't come in with a package because that was too suspicious. So they put the sweater on me, and we went to see her. And she had half of a room. I mean, it was like, you know, maybe from there to about here. And there was a clothesline diagonally, and she with a sheet on it, and she had half of the room. Anyway, I could hear people on the other side. I never met them. But anyway, when we got there, we took it off and gave it to her. What this leads up to is that she wanted to meet my father, and they worked it out that she would come to the train station. She knew the wagon, and just stand on the platform, take out a cigarette, and my father would be standing there, and he would offer her a light, and that's it. It was too dangerous to talk. That gives you an idea of what totalitarianism is. Anyway, they did this, and I remember I was in the wagon, and she came out, took out a cigarette. He lit it, smoke swirled up. They looked at each other. My father came back. They didn't speak. They pretended to be strangers, not know each other. What we did not know until many years later when we were in the United States is that when someone from her apartment had followed her, and when she left the station, she was arrested. And she actually died under questioning.
How old was she?
She would have been about 40. Because my mother was late 30s, and she was an older sister. And what she did was save our lives. Well, I didn't really think about these visas. In fact, I didn't even learn about these visas until around 1980. So I was almost 50, then. And that was because there was a New York Times article about Jewish rabbinical students who had basically taken the same path. And I realized that's how we got here. So, since then, I've thought about it, and of course, learned the story. Sugihara met his granddaughter, and it affects you in the way that somebody sacrificed so that you could survive, basically. Yeah.
Maybe you've already answered this question, but why do you think Sugihara's example still matters today?
Well, I think the thing that is particularly impressive is that he was part of a system that was not so humanitarian, and yet he decided to break ranks and stand up for people. So I think that's the essential thing. Well, I mean, he had a key role in that he hasn't gotten that much attention, but Sugihara could only hand out transit visas, so there had to be a final destination. Even though everybody knew this was fake, still, it would not have worked without him. So he was key to it as well.
Okay, if you could speak to Sugihara or Swarnendijk right now, what would you tell
Well, of course, I'd thank him. Yeah, immensely. Yeah, my portrait. I don't have any grand illusions. I hope my children remember me well. Yeah. Jewish friends did not say, "I wish I could go with you." They would say, "They said you are crazy to leave. You're crazy to leave your apartment. You're crazy." We just walked out and left everything because my father saw it more clearly. He said, "You come right now and get out of the German zone." And so it's very hard for people today to put there, because what happened, and so it's very hard, because, there's some historian said that things that are, now long in the past were once far in the future, So nobody understood. It was just like dissonance or, confusion. Because on the one hand, you've got this guy saying terrible things about Jews and he's coming in. On the other hand, the German army was very nice 20 years earlier. Some people relied on one source, some people relied on their experience, and which was a false guide. Yeah, but, my parents both knew German. So my parents had heard Hitler speeches. I don't know how that affected, they were taking no chances. Other people, there were people who left and returned to the German, because they, as I said, they'd left their wives and children. So there were people important, who left, who were in the Soviet zone, and then, left their wives and children, so they went back, didn't get out, And so it was, I think that confusion, which is something that people, don't understand, can't understand today. Americans just cannot understand this. Right. Because that armies do not kill women and children. That was just, today that means nothing. There was like a dissonance, 20 years earlier, the German army, because we've got to remember the German army replaced the Cossacks, the Russian Cossacks, who were horrible. and so in World War, we're talking about World War I, and so people had, thought, well, maybe things will blow over, because there's a little bad rhetoric, but they'll blow over. But my father had long revolutionary experience and others, and said, no, taking no chances. But it turned out the Soviet zone wasn't any panacea either, because, they were picking up people at night, every night, arresting them, sending them off to Siberia. So it was a strange time. Also, the geography is very hard to understand between Poland and Lithuania and Russia, and who was in charge of which area at which time, and so on. So there's a lot of confusion about all that. But anyway, history. Even there, we're talking about what FDR was doing in the 1930s and 40s. That everything has moved so far to the right that what used to be the Democratic Party you call socialist, there is no socialism anywhere. Socialism originally meant that the government would run basically all business and so on. But this is like a bogeyman. It's just the way I think about it is, if you have a car running on the street, on the road, the car is capitalism, the road is socialism. It's stuff we do together. Yeah, it's just, the question isn't, one or the other. It's like what the mix should be. The army is socialism. Stuff you run by the government, that's socialism. There's no communism anywhere in the world. It's just a bogeyman, The West has gotten out of control in the sense that the disparity between rich and poor has just gotten out of, has reached ridiculous heights. And it's great for people to get rich, but it's not great when they can buy the government. And that's what's happened. So once they buy the government, they lock themselves in and forget it. So that's what we have to untangle, because that's where we are now.